there are still flame retardants on the market that are considered to be toxic to human beings and especially of concern to children. And that comes from the U.S. government, the medical community, and the scientific community. Given the fact that there are non-toxic alternatives available and being used, and the business community itself recognizes that, why should we even consider allowing those remaining and existing flame retardants that are problematic to continue to be on the market?
I think to a certain extent, and I don't know EPA procedure that well, you can make a claim against any particular product or chemical. Obviously, the EPA has opined on this particular issue. I think that if that concern was at the level expressed by this particular assistant administrator, I would have to ask, why hasn't EPA taken action itself to remove that particular PBDE when it has the authority to do so?
Well, apparently they don't, because in the same testimony he goes on to virtually beg Congress to give them the authority, broader authority, to act with regard to these kinds of toxins.
And they are acting. I mean, they've issued a
threatening to act, but it hasn't happened yet.
Well, they've issued a draft significant new use rule and a test rule for these products. So they're engaged, and actually this industry has been working with EPA in executing the phase out in conjunction with the significant new use rule and the test rule.
I'm still not sure I heard an answer to the question.
Well, maybe I could just jump in quickly on the question that you raised. Why would manufacturers choose to use those flame retardants when there are other alternatives?
No. Why should we, the government, continue to allow the use of those products? I understand manufacturers may want to continue manufacturing them, but what good reason is there why we shouldn't pass a law that bans them?
No, those are being phased out. I think the PBDEs,
but not all.
In commerce.
No, not all of the chemicals that we're talking about, the flame retardants, are being phased out.
Well, I think it's important, though, to distinguish PBDEs from other. Not all flame retardants are the same, and so I think we'll be in a very good position to speak on specific flame retardants and their unique properties going forward.
And again, this goes back to, and I've used phthalates as my favorite example because that's the easiest one to understand. You could say flame retardants. When you say flame retardants, you are pulling in, from a chemistry standpoint, you are pulling in families. Phthalates, same thing. It's a family of 13 different chemical compounds. So when you say phthalates, okay, the chemistry now says, what are you talking about? And Assemblyman, when you say flame retardants, again, there are organic phosphates, there are PBDEs, there are all different kinds of flame retardants. And again, it's complicated for me as someone who has represented the industry, but I have learned over time that we've got to be a little bit more specific and not be so broad-brushed when we talk about chemicals.
Okay, well then again, a more generic question. What type of evidence, scientific, anecdotal, whatever, would be compelling enough to you, to the American Chemistry Council, to prohibit the use of a particular chemical? What's the standard?
Not being technical, I can't answer that question, but again...
Don't be technical. Health, if there are peer-reviewed scientific studies, if there's testimony from the medical community and others saying this stuff is toxic, it's hazardous, especially to kids, is that a reasonable standard?
If the information, medical, health, environmental, is sufficient to show actual causal harm. We are not in the business of hurting people. It's no businesses, whether it's us or anyone else. but we do stand by the science. We say that all the time. Sometimes there is dispute in the science, no question about that. But I think it has to be at a high enough level to take that kind of dramatic step when you're saying, okay, we have sufficient evidence to pull that product off the shelves. And I think it should be a high bar, regardless of what the product is. I can't sit here from a technical standpoint and say where that high bar should be, but I think we as an industry hold ourselves to a pretty high standard in terms of how we operate. But again, we will rely on the science. And that includes health. You know, that includes health science.
Okay. Well, relying on the science is good, so let me ask you. The standard that's generally in existence, not generally, the way we do things in this country and in New York State with regard to any given chemical or other substance is, if it's found to be a problem, really found to be a problem, maybe we'll ban it. Why shouldn't we shift to a standard that says before you can use it, you have to prove that it's safe?
That's the precautionary principle.
Exactly.
And the issue with the precautionary principle is that if you take it to its logical conclusion, you would never be able to prove with certainty, because you can't get to absolute zero, that is basic chemistry, that anything is perfectly safe. That's why we think our system is better, because there is risk inherent in everything we do from the moment we get up in the morning until we go to bed, and everything in between. There is some risk. It's called acceptable risk. Every time I fly to one of my other state capitals, I am accepting the risk that that plane can crash. But that is acceptable. Do we ban flying because we know planes can crash? I think the same principle has to apply, and that's why we think that our system is actually better than the precautionary principle. The second issue that we would have with the precautionary principle is it does hinder innovation, because innovation requires creativity, and creativity is stifled if you know that you can't prove something to be 100% or absolute zero. Does that answer your question?
Well, I understand what you're saying, but why don't we, you could seek the same level of certainty in a precautionary principle that you assert exists now to promote the use of a product. And I would suggest that when you get on that airplane and make a trip, you probably feel a little bit better, whether you would want to admit it or not, knowing or understanding that there's a lot of people in the private sector and in government who are out there doing the best to make sure that that plane is put together properly and that all of the other precautions that are necessary and the air traffic controllers are doing their job. And I think that there are probably a lot of parents who buy products making a similar assumption about those products. And probably not even having a good understanding of what may be in those products when they buy something for their child. And I believe that if parents had a little better understanding of the lack of effort that goes into, on the part of the government, let's say, I won't blame you guys, the lack of effort that goes into proving that when you go into a store and buy children's clothes or a car seat or whatever else, that there is not a very rigorous standard that exists for ensuring that everything that has gone into that product isn't going to harm that kid, then I think that there would be an awful lot more concern on the part of the general public in this country.